Your support helps us bring you programs you love. Go to wyomingpbs.org, click on Support, and become a sustaining member or an annual member. It's easy and secure. Thank you.
Ned Frost became a partner with Fred Richard in the early 1900s in Cody country. Ned hunted and trapped while Fred, a taxidermist, skinned, stretched, and prepared the pelts. By 1906, they were licensed guides for both touring and hunting, showing people from all over the world the natural beauty of Northwest Wyoming and Yellowstone National Park. The stories of the Frost and Richard families, next on Wyoming Chronicle.
Funding for Wyoming Chronicle is provided in part by the Dragisevich Foundation, supporting the work of the Wyoming State Parks.
My name is Robin Cutter, and I'm an archivist with the Park County Archives here in Cody. We're talking about the Frost and Richard family today and their rich history that they have in the Cody area and why it's important to Cody and Park County. The Frost family came here in the mid-1800s. They were here early when Buffalo Bill Cody was here, and really they worked with the founding of Cody, but in kind of a different capacity. While Bill Cody and other town founders worked at the development of the community, they helped out, for instance, in hunting and providing the food through their hunting activities for building of the railroad. And so they evolved and developed their own tours and hunting camps that they gave people from all around the world of the Cody area and the Yellowstone area. But what's important is they touched the lives of so many people. They did a lot of promoting and marketing of this area all around the world, with photographs and with movies that they took, and promoting what remarkable things that we have in this area. And so as a result, these people came from all over the world to see this area, and that's how our tourism really started. And throughout the lives of the Frost and Richard families, they have continued that to present day. The Frost and Richard families were really instrumental in the developing of our North Fork area. They built a ranch up on the North Fork, and they guided their tours of probably, anywhere from 80 to 150 people at times that took them on tours into Yellowstone. So building of the East Gate, and actually Ned Frost helped build the Corkscrew Bridge at Sylvan Pass in the early 1900s. So they were very instrumental in the development of this area in going into Yellowstone. So as we hear from other family members and folks about the Frost and Richard family, we hope you enjoy the rest of their story that they have to tell about the history of this area and what impact their family had.
I'm Bob Richard. I was born and raised in Cody, Wyoming, and I want to visit with you about the early days of the Richard family coming to Cody and sharing with you three brothers that came out here. My granddad was 12, and they arrived on scene by railroad at Red Lodge and then came by covered wagon or wagons on the Meeteetse Red Lodge Road, and they thumbed a ride and got to Meeteetse, where they started looking for jobs and worked as herders of cattle in the wintertime out in Oregon Basin on the old LU Ranch. They found that to be pretty tough when you're drinking alkali water and had to mix it with tomato juice or tomatoes to make it drinkable. But they got through the first year, and then my granddad, Fred Richard, met Ned Frost, and they started trapping and hunting and getting meat for the railroad that was being built into the Bighorn Basin, and they provided all the meat for the workers on the railroad. And as they trapped, they could make more money in a day getting a wolf with a bounty. In 1910, they trapped 90 wolves that winter, 300 coyotes, and they got over $10,000 that helped them buy their first ranch in the Wapata Valley. Bill Cody was a builder of this community and of course knew everybody, and the local Chamber of Commerce was already formed, and they were getting the road built into Yellowstone Park. They knew it needed to be a part of the national park entrances to Yellowstone. And the local Chamber of Commerce and my granddad, Ned Frost, they were a part of getting the road built over Sylvan Pass. And once it was finished, in about 1903, Ned Frost and Fred Richard went to the superintendent, who was a U.S. cavalry officer, and they applied for permits to do tours in Yellowstone, riding horseback and by wagon. And their first permits were in 1904. The earliest I have on record is 1906. And they would do a grand loop of Yellowstone Park, 16 days, but they did it in 18, but only charged for 16. Starting in Cody at the railroad station here in Cody, and picked up anywhere from 50 guests to 150 guests. They did 3 trips every summer, but the pass did not melt enough to get over it till the 1st of July. Then they used blasting powder to open the last drifts to get over Sylvan Pass and into the park. So they did one the 1st of July, one the 1st of August, and one in the 1st of September. With that type of groups, he had a camping crew with wagons that hauled all the bedding, tents, food for 18 days. Plus, then he had the carriages, and he rented and borrowed every horse in town. And they did this year after year. And the Burlington Railroad worked very closely to bring guests from the east here. And they did this till the cars started coming in 1915. After 1915, cars were allowed in the park, and people wanted to travel by vehicle. So the wagons ended by 1920, 21, and Frost and Richard continued with horse trips through the park through the 1935. And then very soon after that, of course, we had the war years and lots of changes. But that gives you a little idea of the time span and taking people to Yellowstone. And they also had special trips that included the Grand Loop, but also down to Jackson Hole and the Grand Tetons. The guest list of these trips included people from all over the world. And the reason for that is Bill Cody had the Wild West show in Europe. And his fame and talking about Cody, Wyoming brought people here. In fact, when I was doing tours just a few years ago, I had guests from Germany and elsewhere that belonged to clubs, of Buffalo Bill clubs, but they knew about Yellowstone, they knew about coming to this country and seeing it firsthand. Fred Richard had 2 sons. Jack was born in 1909, and his brother Bob, my namesake, came in 1914. And they grew up on the ranch, learned to work with the tourists, that type thing. And my grandmother, being from Chicago, said these boys need a little bit of Eastern cleaning up and straightening up. And they went to Hill School near Princeton. And my grandmother called it finishing school. They learned to stop cussing and learned to be more of a gentleman. And then as they went to college, my dad wanted to become a newspaper man, and his brother Bob went into the Marine Corps and flew during World War II. In fact, they both were together in the South Pacific. But Dad started out here in Cody with the Cody Enterprise, and then went to Grand Junction, Colorado, and was on the newspaper there and was a photographer. Then he was with the Sheridan Press. He bought the Whirlin newspaper, and he wasn't quite ready for that, sold it, and then came back to Cody to take over the Cody Enterprise in 1941. And of course, then the war opened up, and Dad felt even at the age of 35, he needed to serve our country and joined the Marine Corps and served as a air combat intelligence officer. And that's where he met his brother Bob in the Solomon Islands. My mother took over the newspaper and ran the Cody Enterprise during the war years, and she also published the Heart Mountain Sentinel for the Japanese Relocation Center. And I can remember as a youngster when all the people came in from the relocation center and they'd spend all night getting the paper out because it was the only presses they could get. And so that's a little of that part. And then Dad bought the KODI radio station, and he also was involved in his own newspaper called the Cody Times, which he started in '47 after the war. And then he bought the Cody Enterprise with the help of Millward Simpson and a couple of others here in town. And Dad ran a pictorial newspaper weekly with photographs of this area. And he says, I think I'd rather take photographs than I would to publish this paper and have all the work that goes with it. So he sold his interest, retired, and became a commercial photographer and did quite well. And when he passed away, we had donated over 250,000 negatives to the museum here at the Buffalo Bill Center of the West. And they're available, and it's quite a history of the Cody country, Yellowstone, and everything that went on here from the 30s through the first part of 1990.
I'm Mac Frost. My grandfather, Ned Frost, was the one who discovered Frost Cave. And it was, let's see, January of 1909. And he was hunting. I've heard tales that it was with a single dog and it was with a pack of dogs. Suffice it to say that he was hunting with a dog and they were after a bobcat. The bobcat ran over the edge of basically a cliff. The dogs followed, so it obviously wasn't too steep right there. But I heard it described that my grandfather felt that the dogs were all of a sudden baying from a great distance away. And when he followed the dogs down the cleft, he came across the entrance to this cave. And he went inside, and he always smoked, so he had matches in a pocket in his vest. And he used those matches and some paper that he had in his pockets to light his way into what they called the big room. So he went down into town and told a bunch of friends. And a few days or maybe a week or so later, they organized an expedition with ropes and wire and candles and lanterns and warm clothing, and they all came back up. There's about 8 or 10 of them. And they did a fairly thorough exploration of the cave and discovered that it was fairly extensive and that there were areas where they couldn't get into, and they knew that it went further and further and further. It was also about that time that Buffalo Bill, having heard about the new cave, brought a number of Cody residents, including 5 or 6 women, and they all rode up to the cave and went in and toured around, and they were extolling its virtues and whatnot, and it was a pretty neat deal. Buffalo Bill got right on it and decided that it was something that could help promote tourism in the area. Something similar to, say, Mammoth Cave. And they lobbied in Congress to get things done. I don't know as Congress went too far with it, but President Taft went ahead and created the National Monument in September of that year. So right away, it turned into something relatively special. I think that was probably the biggest deterrent to the idea of a commercial venture and a tourist attraction, was the fact that the access to it was so poor. It wasn't until 1954 that the leaders in town decided that they really needed to do something to get the monument turned into a tourist attraction, and it wasn't going to happen with the Park Service. So they lobbied Congress and they got permission. Congress delisted the National Monument. It was the Shoshone Caverns is what they called it in those days. They felt that Frost Cave had negative connotations in that it said, oh, it's going to be a cold place to go into. Well, yeah, it was cool, but it wasn't that bad. But Frost Cave just didn't cut it. So they called it the Shoshone Canyon Caverns. And they delisted it in 1954. At that point, the city came into ownership of the cave, and they started to call it Spirit Mountain Caverns. Spirit Mountain was the name that the Indians gave to what we now call Cedar Mountain. Actually, the immigrants into the area always called it Cedar Mountain. It opened in 1957, and with great hoopla, and my grandfather was there at the opening ceremony, and Millward Simpson, who was the governor of the state at the time, was there to cut the ribbon. A lot of other prominent Cody businessmen and politicians, and then there it was. And it worked reasonably well for a few years, but it just wasn't the attraction that they were hoping that it was going to be.
I was asked to explain my relationship to Fred Richard, my grandfather, and his experiences with the Prince of Monaco. Everyone else in the world says it's Monaco, but locally it's Camp Monaco, and that was named after the camp. I've spent many nights at Camp Monaco. It's 12 and a half, 13 miles up behind Pahaska. It's one of our favorite places to ride, before the fire and after the fire. The fires of '88 destroyed the tree that the artist had done. And I've got, my granddad's story on that was, we got into camp. The prince wanted to hunt. He was a skilled hunter. He had hunted around the world. But he wanted to take his bodyguard with him. I said, no, we can't do that. And he wanted to take the camp artist with him. I said, no, we can't do that. We're going to go hunt. And that really insulted the prince's bodyguard. The bodyguard then really had a disaffection for Granddad. I have a lot of fond memories about Monaco, and my granddad was a great storyteller, and there's still some people that thought not everything was true, what makes a great storyteller. It was a lot of fun.
One of the things that was that they tried to do is every 16 or 20 miles along the route of any stagecoach company, they would put these stations where they could change out the horses and feed the guests for a fee. And the Frost Ranch, the halfway house is what they called it, because it was halfway between Corbett Crossing and the town of Meeteetse, roughly. And it was a going concern, and they became well known as the best place on the route to get a bite to eat. And the hospitality was great, and more people decided that, well, maybe we'd like to stay a while. So they built a better cabin instead of the little soddy that was there at the time, and they would guest people who would get off the stage and stay for a while. At that time, my great-grandfather Malin also, he went out into the basin and would round up wild horses and bring them back to the ranch and break them to order, as it were. Some people would want a plow horse, some people might want a buggy horse, some people might want just a riding horse. And so he would take their specifications and he would train the horse to whatever purpose the purchaser wanted, and then he would sell the horse to them. They also did a certain amount of farming. They could do mainly hay, grass, that sort of thing. Jesse was helping to run the place, but he also had a freighting business. There were a lot of freight wagons that came in and used the same road. And he had a business where they would freight or contract to freight meat, game meat, basically, during the fall, winter, and spring months and take it up to Billings. And then coming back, the ranches in the area would order sundries and groceries and things like that, and then that stuff would get delivered so that they didn't have to deadhead back all the way from Billings, Montana, which was the closest railhead at that time. When they first arrived there, the closest railhead was the UP down in Rawlins, and that's where a lot of the cattle had come into the country from. A lot of the bigger cattle ranches, as it were. But they ran that for many, many years until, there was a big depression in the late 1800s, early 1900s. And the bank called their note on the freighting business, and they lost that. They weren't doing too bad, but times was tough. And they gathered up a load of hay and came into Cody. This would be Jesse and my grandfather, Ned, who was in his teens at that time. And they went to the livery stable and paid off their bill with this load of hay and went and got some groceries. And they were getting ready to head back out, and Jesse turned to Ned and said, "I've got a 5-spot that's burning a hole in my pocket. I'm going to go and get in the game at the council saloon." So he went in, and Ned hung around out in front and hung around and hung around. And pretty soon, after a while, Jess came out, shoved a wad of cash in to Ned, said, "Go stable the horses, get yourself a room, I'm still in the game." The game went on for, I'm told, a day and a half, until finally there was just 2 players left, Jess with all the money, and the owner of the council saloon, a man by the name of Chapman, with the deed. And they bet it all in one final pile. And to this day, nobody knows what the winning hand was, other than the fact that Jesse had it. He won the council saloon in a poker game in fine Wyoming cowboy fashion. And from that day forward, he was the proprietor of the council saloon, and his fortune was made. And he became a businessman in town. He also put in, he built a building in Grable. There was another council saloon that was in Basin. He had property in Meeteetse and a mercantile store there. And he became a very well-to-do individual.
My dad was Nedward Malin Frost. He went to the University of Wyoming and graduated with a history degree. He also got his lieutenant's bar from the military academy down there. And when World War II broke out, he took his commission and he was sent off to Los Angeles to be a safety officer on the shore battery. And he was also carried documents and stuff back and forth between different bases. They sent him to Fort Carson, Colorado, with a briefcase full of top secret stuff. And he was walking down the street, and he came on the 10th Mountain Division, trying to train guys to pack the 75 millimeter howitzers on mules, 2 mules to the gun. And he stood there and watched that for a while, and he started laughing. And this colonel walked up to him and he says, "What's so funny?" And he says, "I hate to tell you, but you got a heck of a mess here." And the colonel asked him, he said, "What would you know about it?" And he said, "I grew up in a pack outfit." 24 hours later, he was in the 10th Mountain Division training these guys to pack these howitzers and stuff. And so he got that done. He took them to Italy as the battery commander for the service battery that handled the mules. And they packed those guns and ammunition and stuff all over in Italy. And when the war was over, they gathered up all these mules and horses and stuff and shipped them back home. He went up to Rome and visited his younger brother Jess for a few days, and then came back. And when he got on the troop ship to come home, he pretty well figured out that he was going to come home and take the ranch over, because my granddad was getting to the point where he couldn't do it anymore. Actually, my granddad had written my dad's general and asked for his release, and that didn't work because they weren't about to turn the guy loose that knew how to pack these things. So anyway, when he got on the troop ship and headed home, he got in a poker game with a bunch of other officers, and he made enough money playing poker on that ship coming back to the United States to buy into the ranch up there, which was somewhere around $40,000, I think. And he also put himself partway through UW playing poker. After he took the pack outfit over, he would never let a deck of cards in his hunting camps. He let them play a little poker and stuff on summer trips if they wanted to, but there was no playing cards in his hunting camps. He'd watched a lot of these other outfitters that had these big drunken poker games and stuff, and they always had fights, and somebody wound up getting hurt, so that was how he handled that. He outfitted for 20 years and sold out in 1966 to Win Condon out of Saratoga. I guided for him for 2 or 3 years in there. I wrangled horses on summer trips. I ran the horse concession at Pahasca for all the time I was in junior high and high school. So when he left the outfitting business, and he went to Cheyenne as a state historian and was down there till 1978 when he took sick and passed away.